All right, can you guys hear us? Let's wait for
a comment. I can hear you, Anthony.
Excellent. And the music, right? All right, cool. Looks like people are able to hear us. Hopefully they are able to see us as well. Well, they can see me right now, but we've got Markus Reuter, who is live with us on Skype. We are listening to his new album. It's called Truce. It is the 100th album on Moonjune Records, which is not only really cool, but Moonjune is just an excellent label to begin with, and Leonardo is an excellent guy. So, Markus, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about this new album, what it is, why you made it, all that good stuff.
It's an album that came about because of Leonardo, actually. Leonardo Pavkovic of Moonjune Records. He suggested that I record an album where I actually play the touch guitar as a lead instrument, so that people get an idea that I can actually play. And I found that really funny in a way. But it's kind of true. Like, since I started out in ambient music, where it doesn't, well, people think that it doesn't matter if you can play or not. And I'm kind of like, I really enjoy just playing a few notes and making them mean a lot. But on Truce, on the album, I kind of like played so many notes, and it was just really liberating in a way. And I've been saying to some friends that I think that it's really like, because my wife/girlfriend was pregnant with my daughter then I think that it was already the influence of my daughter that kind of is in this album somehow.
Well, congratulations on being...
Or just in the way that I opened up.
Congratulations on being a new dad. That's awesome. That must be a pretty big... it's life-changing for all of us, but I would imagine it's having its effect on you, not just musically, but personally and professionally. So feel free to share anything there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're still at the beginning of the process, but I can already feel, like, she's not even 5 months old now, and I can already feel how my artistic outlook and my aims have kind of changed already, and I'm very, very happy with what I've achieved. So even if I would never ever play again, I'd be happy. And it's kind of like interesting. I've been struggling with what I would call like burnout for a few years, and for many years actually, I would say. And I really don't really enjoy playing that. I don't enjoy playing anymore, and I don't think I ever have. And that's kind of why it's so fascinating for me to hear these albums that I've done, and especially Truce is really just it's kind of an expression of not wanting anything, and I think that's what makes it interesting to me. It's not really about liking it or not liking it. And you told me that you have a hard time getting into that album, which I kind of can't even understand, and yeah.
Yeah. So the album is challenging. I do want to highlight that. For me as a listener, I've listened to a lot of solo guitar music. The Steve Vai, the Joe Satriani, the jam band type stuff. This is more of a jam band album, which is not really up my alley particularly, but that's okay. The music obviously needs to suit the artist, not the one listener. However, it is pretty out of character for you. So can you talk a little about how you ended up with this band and doing this kind of music?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, Leonardo Pavkovic had the idea that I record a poetry album, and it was a no-brainer for me to do that with Asaf Sirkis, the drummer, who's just wonderful, wonderful. And I had been recording with him at these La Casa Murada sessions for a few years, and he was there at the studio. And so the question was, who do I want to bring in as a bass player? And Fabio came to mind because he's just a very good friend of mine. Originally, I got to. He was a stick student, Chapman stick student of mine. Like in '98 or something, like a long time ago, and he's a kind of like more or less famous producer in Germany, like with even like #1 records and stuff. And he's very much like a pop guy, but he's also one of the most amazing musicians I can ever imagine. He plays fretless bass like a god, and there is this album called Polytown by David Torn, Mick Karn, and Terry Bozzio, which I really love. And just that combination of fretless bass, drums, and guitar, and some loops was really fascinating to me. And so that's kind of the setting we started out with. And like the music that came out is very different, but that kind of was the inspiration. And yeah, what I liked about Fabio's playing is that he's like so melodic, so simple in a way that it's kind of like a counterpoint to what I was trying. I tried to play non-linear. So like when you kind of compare this kind of album with like Steve Vai or Joe Satriani record, there's not much in common, I think, because like my aim as a player is really to kind of, and I mean, we've talked about Heartland also, right? And so before I recorded Truce, Heartland had been composed and released, and Heartland was kind of like a study for me to actually go deeper into nonlinear narration, musical narration, and in a way, I do that on Truce, but in real time, and so it's more like a collection of motifs that are improvised in the moment, which then are kind of like recombined and also developed. Like if you pay close attention, you hear that they actually kind of develop, and yeah, and that's really kind of what the album is about for me. And I had even forgotten about studying Indian music, which I did in the mid '90s with Daniel Shell and Ashok Pathak, and now listening back to that, I kind of remember the exercises and the kind of motivic improvisation that I learned back then, and somehow it's now found a way back into my active music making.
That's fantastic. Playing. So we got a question from Henry, which I should have asked. You said you don't really enjoy playing. Then why do you still do it? Like, what makes you do it, and why would you? We all have jobs we don't like. We all have had those jobs, but I think being a musician is it's not a choice in the way that it's like a choice for a lot of people with full-time corporate gigs. But there's in your whole world, there's not a whole lot of other stuff that you would be doing. So can you talk a little about like why would you still do it?
Well, the question really is, do I really still want to do it? I mean, it's
well, you said you didn't.
I would be. I'd be.
You were saying you didn't ever even enjoy it, or something like that. So why would you continue to do something that you didn't?
Because there's like an underlying motif and an underlying motivation that makes me become the player or the performer. It's like the urge to create, and if it has 7 years of practicing independence, rhythmic independence exercises to play a certain style of music, and then I cannot ask somebody else to do that, right? I mean, I could do that, and maybe there in some circles there are ways to do that, but I had to just practice to play as freely as I do myself in order to then apply myself in a situation like what happened with Truce. I mean, but it's the same with my ambient soundscape albums. but it's just not that noticeable. That like all that awareness building work basically goes into these pieces of music. But it's basically that there's nobody else who would be able to do it. That's really why. And I mean, and maybe that's not good enough of an explanation, but that's really it.
All right. Well, that's sufficient for me. Let's put on the let's listen to Swoon Age in honor of Kathy, who I believe is here.
Yes.
So you want to prep us for this song at all?
It's kind of like my friend Jim said that it's the one for the ladies, which I find funny. It's quite simple. It's like, I think, the A minor or E minor tune. So it's like guitaristic sounding in a way because of the key. And the funny thing is that it turned out like the bass line reminds me of a Kraftwerk, like the German band Kraftwerk. They have a tune called Metropolis, I think. And that's what it reminds me of. But it's just a short, like 2.5 minutes song.
Yep. All right, so let's listen to Swoon Age. And when we get back from the song, I want you to tell us about your shirt.
Yes, please.
All right. Oh, excuse me. All right. So that was nice. That's a cool song. I appreciate that
Yeah.
one. Kathy, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You know, I just finished a beer, so I think I enjoyed even more. But that's a cool track. And as promised, I think you owe us all a description of why you are wearing a colorful shirt with pineapples on it. That is very non-German of you.
Really?
Oh yeah.
No. This shirt was part of the things that we wore on the Devin Townsend tour, which took place in November and December last year, and it was kind of just like I said, like this album Truce was under the influence of my daughter, and also that tour was under the influence of my daughter. First of all, because I was away from home, and I only saw her for 2 evenings in 5 weeks of being away. But really, I don't know. I mean, it's just an experiment. and I bought 2 shirts like this, and Devin liked the other one so much that he's been wearing it almost all the time since the tour.
So for those who don't know,
Yeah.
Markus was on tour with an artist that we featured here on Make Weird Music. His name's Devin Townsend. He's been making music for 30 years, I think, as a solo artist. I first heard about him because when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with Steve Vai. And Steve's album Sex and Religion featured Devin as the vocalist and as a guitarist. And Devin is a beast of a musician who has really evolved over the last 30 years or so. So in his last album, it's called Empath. It's a fantastic album for any type of listener. I mean, there's so many genres of music on it. It is very heavy rock, but if you go in there expecting some moments of heavy rock and some screaming, you won't be surprised by that. You'll be surprised by how diverse and dynamic the album is. So, Markus, why don't you share a little bit about how you ended up becoming an artist on a Devin Townsend tour of Europe?
I met him at a private dinner, really, and I wasn't really aware who he was or what he was doing, and he certainly didn't know what I was doing, and we got talking, and there was like instant bromance, and it developed from there. It was really super organic and natural that we kind of became friends. And just a few weeks later, like Mike Keneally was also on the tour, and he also co-produced Empath. And I asked Mike Keneally if they would ever consider, or if they need somebody on the tour to play extra guitar. And then Mike Keneally answered to me and said that Devin had already contacted him about getting me into the band. So it was mutual, and it was a fantastic experience. I mean, I don't think that people really understand. I mean, people think that Devin is great, and he really is great, but I think he's even greater than people think. And he's like one of the most talented musicians I've ever met, and just really absolute, like, God level, really incredible. And if I may use that word here, but you know what I mean. And it was incredible. Like I was allowed to just be like not in the front line on stage, which was great for me. It was a very new thing, and it was such a humbling experience because everything was so beautiful. And if people ask me what was the favorite show you've ever been to in your life, I would say it was the Helsinki show on that tour where I was on stage. But I had like maybe my 4th out-of-body experience in my life on that stage, kind of watching the show as I was playing on stage. And that was incredible. It was really like maybe my favorite musical experience ever.
What were you guys playing? Like, was it the whole set, or was there a moment? Or
It was the whole show. I think it started like after like the first song is Borderlands, and Borderlands has this like slow atmospheric song in the middle, like in the middle section is like a song on its own somehow, and it was during that song that I got kind of transported, and from then on till the end of the show, I was kind of watching the show from the outside. And it's funny. I know that people. It's kind of a strange thing to say this, but it happened to me several times in my life, and it was a surprise because the last time that I had an out of body experience was when I was 21 or so. So it was really special.
That's pretty incredible. I think as a player, I've had moments of flow, that's for sure. And in fact, I'm writing a lot about that as I've been thinking a lot about Fracture and Fractured, and playing those types of pieces. They really require you to be completely yourself. And there's this guy I've been reading named Kapil Gupta, and he has this saying, performance is a side effect of effortlessness. And I found that the only way to get to effortlessness is to completely forget about myself and ignore whatever is happening in my body so that I can relax and play, let's say, a perpetual motion piece for 2 or 3 hours straight. Now, obviously, that's not an out-of-body experience, but perhaps you could help us to differentiate how you might experience these things, because I think for most of us who probably have not had an out-of-body experience, how do you kind of differentiate being just so completely and supremely in the moment with the music versus something greater?
I mean, there are many ways how one can put that, really. And like some people, I mean, I'm also a psychologist, so there are like words like dissociative state or associative state of being and stuff like that. But the words that I would use as a musician is like you could be purely listening, like you can just become listening itself, so that the listener kind of disappears, and that's kind of like maybe the best explanation and description I can give for what happened to me on that tour, on that show in Helsinki, or what even happens when I'm recording. And Truce is kind of another example of that. I mean, it was different. I wouldn't call that out of body experience, but still, it was this trance, like this full trance where it's just about moving your fingers. I mean, during that whole session of recording that album, never once did I think about which note I was playing. I mean, listening back, I can say this piece is in A minor and start, or the other one's in E minor, and another one is like in actually there are scales, like even like complex scales that kind of emerge in the moment, but they weren't planned, and I think that's kind of like this, what I said, like you kind of become listening itself. It's and that can obviously feel like not being a physical entity anymore, because it's very spiritual.
Right.
Yeah. But it's also something very practical. It's not some it's not mumbo jumbo. It's just something that happens when you get into a deep trance.
Sure. Yeah. For me, I don't know if you have anything like this. I think people who intensely practice an instrument in particular, sometimes when I sleep, I have these intense practice dreams, and I wake up feeling like I've practiced for 8 hours. I have the same feelings, and even in my mind, as I was dreaming, it was so lucid. I could feel the strings under my fingers. I could feel the frets under my fingers. And I feel like outside of this kind of conversation, it's very difficult to even say such a thing without being ridiculed, which normally I'm ridiculed for a lot of other things, but not for my lucid dreams. I don't know if you have these kinds of experiences as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm also a lucid dreamer, and it's kind of it's a good thing, but it's also kind of sad because other people tell me about the dreams where crazy things happen, and they kind of don't even know that they're dreaming. And for me, it's like I always know when I'm dreaming, and I can basically decide to wake up, and it's kind of boring in a way. And I wish sometimes I could go back to this, more. I don't want to say naive, but like less of a trained person, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how I experience like the world,
The beginner's mind, looking at the world as a child type thing,
Yeah. And it's interesting because there are some really interesting books by Carlos Castaneda, which are like on the surface they look like books about drug-induced experiences, but it's really about like a spiritual awakening and much deeper. And in that book, there were some exercises mentioned, like that you can kind of start trying to look at your hands in your dreams as like the first stage to get to lucid dreaming. And so you basically, before you go to bed, you kind of bring your hands up to your eyes and you kind of program your brain to maybe remember that move in your dream. and that's something that I did when I was, I don't know, 17 or something like that, and ever since, like these skills, if you want to call it skills, has kind of developed and has also become part of my waking life. Also, like you have experience with guitar craft, and I remember that like the sitting practice, that is like something that people do in the morning. At some point, it felt to me as if I was doing that in my lucid dreams.
Yeah.
And people asked me, I mean, when do you meditate? And I said that I meditate when I'm asleep. And people were laughing about that. But I think that there is some truth to it. It's like I can't be entirely sure myself, but it really feels like this way of being has become part of my my sleep world.
I have to say, it makes perfect sense to me. I have the weird dreams, the world is wrapped around, in a circle. I have a lot of the strange, things that don't make any sense, people falling through floors or me going through ceilings or whatever, playing 5 instruments at one time. But I know the difference, like I definitely have those lucid experiences. But it's funny when you mention that motion of bringing your hand to your eyes. It reminds me of like when you launch a new virtual reality game. I don't have one of these modern systems that does the finger sensing, but all the videos you see on YouTube of these guys playing, that's like the first thing they show. You look down at your hands and then you see these virtual hands doing this kind of thing, It's we live in a simulation, right? So So speaking of things to do with your hands, there's a song on here called Let Me Touch Your Batman.
Yes.
Why don't you just give us a little sneak preview of why the song is called Let Me Touch Your Batman, what that means, and then we'll get to hearing it.
Unfortunately, I don't remember anymore.
Oh.
Because I'm keeping this list of title ideas, like it's a long list. And I think it was something that maybe Julie Slick said, or something. I think it was Julie, and I maybe changed a couple words. I'm not sure if it was Batman or and it doesn't have any meaning other than making people wonder what it means.
Right. All right. Well, perfect. Let's take a listen.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, that's a pretty killer track. Some serious grooves, unbelievable performances. I mean, obviously this is recorded live. The three of you guys in a studio.
Yes.
So this is not your first time recording at La Casa Morada with Asaf Sirkis. You actually did it on this record. Let me hold it up so the camera can pick it up. Too much light. Anyway, Mark Wingfield, Markus Reuter, and Asaf Sirkis recorded this album, Lighthouse. And if you like this record that we're listening to right now, I think there's a good chance you're gonna like Lighthouse. So, Markus, why don't you talk about your previous work with Asaf and La Casa Morada and Leonardo, and give us a little more background on that stuff.
Yes. So, really, like one of the, how shall I say, like, obviously the circumstances have a big influence on what kind of music can happen when musicians play together, right? So, like, if people have like a common aim or a common understanding, things can really go very far in that particular direction, whereas when there's like conflicting views, it can be difficult or it can be inspiring. And somehow with La Casa Morada, which is Leonardo Pavkovic's invention, really, he's kind of put a group of people together, or like an ever-growing group of people. And the idea is, or what kind of the idea that emerged was to be really free with music and to not really think in terms of stylistic choices, really, but just in terms of I really don't. I'm like, it's really maybe the kind of energy. It's like about the kind of energy. It's not about which notes you play. It's not about what it sounds like. Really, it's more about the wave, the overall wave of things. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So, Lighthouse. Can you tell us a little about the album Lighthouse and what people could expect to hear from that? It's a double LP. It's a beautiful package if you buy the vinyl. And there's 8 tracks on the record. I don't know if the CD is different, but tell us a little about what it's like playing with these guys, how you prepare yourself in the studio, and what you're doing when you're there.
I mean, there's no preparation. That's what it's all about. You just get together and you play. Right, and you compose in the moment, and you consider the improvisation an act of composition. And like what is special about Lighthouse and why I do recommend it is it's an album where there's 2 people who basically play guitars, even though my instrument has like a really wide range, but it's 2 guitars basically with a drummer, and only occasionally, well, not occasionally, but I do play low notes as well, but not like a bass player would. So it's really kind of interesting in that regard, where the setting of, like, whenever you have drums or bass guitar in a band, there's like so much common vocabulary there that musicians quite often kind of tend to repeat or use that vocabulary. And in this combination with me playing drones on the touch guitar, and then Mark and I both soloing on top of that, really gives quite a different dynamic. And with Asaf being such a wonderful listener and player, it's like a triangle of where like everything is kind of influencing each other, and like the album, the Stone House, which we recorded like just the day before, I think. Or the day after, I can't remember right now, is with Yaron Stavio on bass, and that album is actually very different, also very good. I love it too, but like the bass player really very much defines the sound of a record, and the same is true for Truce. and I brought Fabio in to give the record that kind of sound and that kind of melodic phrasing for the bass was kind of important for me for that record.
When you were composing these pieces, did you say, okay, Fabio, like, here's what we're going to play, or did it come organically? Because it sounds like, I mean, obviously he's playing ostinatos and you're soloing over them, but did those come up while you guys were together, or did you come in with any preconceived musical, motifs?
No, the concept was that we wanted to start from Fabio's riffs, but these, even though he probably had some ideas for this before he came into the studio, but what we did is he actually played something. We took like maybe 3 to 5 minutes before recording each piece, and Fabio played a riff, and then I said, okay, maybe I gave him feedback, and I said, okay, so maybe if you change that last bar and add a note, or maybe can you play that same riff but in C sharp and use the open D string as like a passing note, or like stuff like that. I kind of gave him feedback on his initial ideas, and he was the only person who kind of knew what he was going to start with. And so obviously also we had, like both Asaf and I, we had heard what he's going to start with. So then we had, the whole album was recorded to a click track, which was part of the concept. And so the click, the recording engineer, his name is Jesus, he pressed record. We heard the click track, count in of 4, and we started playing. Huh. And both Asaf and I, we had no idea where we were going to take the music. And so it's basically Asaf and I being the improvisers against the ostinato that Fabio then started. But then throughout the process of recording, obviously Fabio starts playing variations and also kind of introducing new sections even. With this bass.
I'm really glad that you mentioned what a good listener Asaf is, because that was something that stood out to me on this record. It's very clear he's not just playing, to keep time. He's actually hearing what you and Fabio are doing, and you guys are obviously playing live, but there's actual communication. It's not like, okay, Asaf, you play the drum part, and Fabio, you play the bass part, and I'll play the leads. There's real 3-way communication happening. So that was cool.
Yeah, and it's actually 4-way if you think about it, because there's always like the soundscape in the background is something that I played live, like on these songs. Like sometimes we cut the first 16 bars off, where I'm actually kind of feeding the looper, right? So the songs may start like 1 minute into the original performance, yeah, and you can hear that there's like certain motifs in the background textures, which are also being picked up by us in the live. And these, right. since I'm using these like feedback loops, these textures also change and these melodies change, and there's like a fourth member there that we can also respond to. And yeah, Asaf it's incredible. I mean, if you listen to like the stabs that there are in the song, like there are so many moments where all the three of us kind of land on the same kind of stab, and it's just fascinating, and it's almost like with this level of listening, it becomes as if you can kind of you become some sort of clairvoyant in a way. Right. You can kind of see into the future. It's just like a few milliseconds, really, but it's actually a real thing, and it's fascinating even to me, and that's why I like this kind of jam album is really maybe not something that I would listen to. I'm not kind of interested in jam band music. But like kind of studying what I did is kind of interesting for me to grow as a musician. Right. So when I listen back to it, I'm not trying to judge it. I'm just trying to kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any chances of you performing live with this power trio?
Yes, Yes, yeah. So we were going to play at the Gouveia festival in Portugal. It's a prog festival in Portugal, and I don't have the date. It's at the beginning of April.
Okay, but nothing in the U.S., right?
And not yet, but Leonardo is talking about bringing us on tour in the US next year.
Very cool.
So the aim is that Truce, the album, will become Truce, the trio, kind of like my band, but not really. Like,
right.
You know, we also share the writing credits on this, yeah, it should be interesting. Like for me to have like a second trio, because as you know, I play with Stickman, with Tony and Pat, but the second trio allows me to just play really differently, and it would be great to be on the road and to kind of refine this. I mean, like Fabio, and this is something that is very interesting to was the very first time that wasn't completely written.
Sorry, you're gonna have to repeat
and
that. You
he's
said
like, I think he's
you cut out. You said this is very interesting to me. The very first time something.
Yeah, the very first time. It's the very first time for Fabio. It was the very first time for Fabio to actually play music that wasn't completely written.
Oh, that was his first improv.
Yes, and it was kind of like my challenge for him to bring him into this world of improvised music, and he did so well. It's incredible, and I'm thinking like if we go on the road and do this, there's like this band is gonna be
monstrous.
Monstrous, I don't know, but it's more about, for me, it's more about the process, right?
Right.
I kind of like, I'm curious what will develop.
Yeah. All right, great. So before we go, why don't you tell people who are here now and people who will be watching this later, tell them where they can get the album, and I've got the URL at the bottom of the screen, as you've probably seen, but tell them the best way to support you and how they can help you.
Yeah, the best way to support me is to look for my name on Bandcamp, really, and there are several, or like a couple stores that offer my music. It's Iapetus, by my very own store, or Markus Reuter .bandcamp.com. And Truce was released by Moonjune Records, so there is a Bandcamp profile, which is Markus dash Reuter dash Moonjune or something like that.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the screen. That's the
but
one.
But just look for my name. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of the best way to kind of get my record directly from me, and that way I actually see some of the money that people spend. So.
Cool, and you have an annual membership package as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but obviously the stuff that is put out by on a label is not part of the package. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm just asking for permission to also give that to my VIPs. But like for example, there's my band Central Zone, which not many people know about. It's like my project that has been ongoing since 1995 or 96 actually, and it's like some of the most amazing music I've ever done. Somehow it's just gotten so under the radar. It's kind of like sad, and it's even hurting me. Yeah, but there's like some of the best playing and some of the most incredible improvisations I've ever done are at Central Zone, and yeah, maybe we can post a link to centralzone.bandcamp.com also.
Sure. Yeah.
I would appreciate that. And yeah, so there's lots of ways, obviously, to listen. Like I've also kind of given into the idea to have some of my music on Spotify and some stuff streaming on YouTube, and just kind of I've learned that there's very little overlap between the audience that actually buys from me and the audience that would never buy from me. And like if there's ever like a person that comes from the non-buying camp to the buying camp, I'm very grateful. But that's why there's like a selection of stuff also on Spotify.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's close with the first half of Power Series. Sound good? The track Power Series?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I thought I lost you. All right, let's close with the first half of Power Series. And thank you, everyone, for joining on the stream. We really appreciate all of the comments and the interactions, and you taking the time to be with us while we were doing this together. So thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you.
And I hope you enjoy this.
Thank you, everyone. Yes.
Oh.